Welcome to the Advanced Freelancing Podcast. Every week, you'll hear strategies for building your online service-based business your way. And now, here's your host, veteran freelancer, author, and TEDx speaker, Laura Briggs.
Are you ready for a short, sweet, but important episode of the Advanced Freelancing Podcast? More and more, I am an advocate for talking to every client who's hiring you for a project on the phone or on a quick video call before you jump into working with them. There are a lot of important reasons for this, but one of the most important has to do with this number one question I want you to be asking of every client that you're talking to. Now, you might assume that it's, do you have the budget? Or are you prepared to get started immediately? Or have you already created guidelines and instructions? There's no doubt that those things are important to kicking off a relationship with a freelance client, but that's not what I want you to focus on for today's episode. The important question you need to ask your clients is, have you worked with freelancers before? Now, that's the opening question, so it's certainly not the only one that you need to ask your potential clients. You want to follow up with that based on their answer to it. So let's imagine, for example, that they say, no, I have not worked with freelancers before. This immediately signals to you that you have to do some educational work in teaching your client how to best work with you. This client might also be less familiar with some of the rules and laws around what they can and can't do with a freelancer. You may have to take on that additional burden of helping to put guardrails on that relationship and to make sure that things stay on track. This is also powerful because you're going to learn how to position yourself as an expert in an answer to this question. So if they have not worked with freelancers before, you have a really good opportunity to mold this client into the behavior and other boundaries that you want to see them use with you on an ongoing basis. So in a sense, you're not having to overcome the baggage they're bringing to the relationship from past people they worked with where it wasn't a good experience, or bad systems that they've built but are now so ingrained into the company that they're difficult to undo, and they're kind of like just doing things like, say, invoicing is really clunky, but they're not going to change it because it feels like too much work. When you can set up that relationship yourself by saying, here are the things that have worked best with clients I've worked with before, you position yourself as an expert and reinforce the value that you bring to the table as a freelance service provider. Now, in this conversation, it's not just about you answering that question and explaining some of your recommendations around how you think you can work effectively together. You're listening to see if they value working with you or working with freelancers, period. The reason I actually like to start this as a yes/no question is I want to hear their candid words on the experience they've had with past freelancers. So I start with that question of, have you worked with freelancers before? Tell me a little bit about how that went. You're likely going to get a very candid answer about the success they've had. Maybe they worked with a freelancer for years and this person only left recently, and the company is really experiencing the loss of that person. You can lean into that by stepping in and meeting deadlines right away and being really professional in what you do. That can help them feel like you understood one of their biggest needs, which was to have reliable long-term support. So it's valuable to know this because we also might hear negative things. Oh, yes, we've hired and fired 7 other freelancers, or we have a really hard time keeping people here longer than 3 months, or other material that is helpful for you to know, is this even a possible working relationship? I find a lot of value in hearing how my clients talk about past freelancers because it gives me a sense of the overall respect that they have for hiring independent contractors and freelance talent. They might say something that gives you a hint that they've hired freelancers in the past because they saw it as the cheapest option, or because it was a short-term project and they really just needed to fill the gap. The way that someone answers this in a different way might go the direction of, yeah, we really view freelancers as part of our trusted team. So I'll give you an example from one of my current clients. I asked her this question. I knew she'd worked with freelancers before. She had an established agency that had hired many other independent contractors. So I just asked sort of her general experience so that I could hear more about not just the respect, but the systems in place. What are the expectations? What are the things that we'll have to know about interacting with those other freelancers on the agency as well? And her answer told me a lot about the general value she thinks that her freelancers bring to the table on behalf of her clients. So she mentioned a benefit that I'd never heard any other freelance client ever offer, which was paid holidays. So if we normally turned projects in on, say, a Monday, or someone billed hourly on a Monday and they typically billed 4 hours, if that Monday was Labor Day or some other holiday, we were instructed as freelancers to bill on that day, even if we were not doing any work. So the company would actively take a holiday for their employees as well as their contractors, but we were essentially receiving holiday pay. Now, that's a small gesture, right? That pops up a couple of times a year. However, it showed me a general sense of appreciation for freelance talent and what people had to bring to the table and to offer. And so that told me immediately that they viewed freelancers as a part of their consistent team. Another thing that you can do if you're stepping into something like an agency or people who've worked with freelancers before, ask if you can speak with the other freelancers. I recently stepped down from an opportunity that was positioned and paid as a freelance role, but really what I discovered from conversations with several of the contractors in that position in different areas of the company is that they were being treated more like employees, and they were conscious of it. And it was a concern that they shared openly with me. So that helped me make an informed decision about not proceeding with that company. So in the best case scenario, you'll talk to someone who can say, yeah, I've been here for 6 months. I love it. We get paid well. We are respected here. I really love working with this company. If they can't give you names of anyone who is currently working on the team, that is probably a red flag if they indicate that they have a pretty substantial freelance team. It's really not that big of an ask. It's something you would do if you were an employee interviewing for a full-time role, right? You would definitely have that conversation with them about, hey, let me hear from, let me at least read the Glassdoor reviews of what it's like to work with you, sort of a situation. So asking this question really sets you up for success. And it also cracks open that door to exit the relationship if you hear something that is problematic. One of the most powerful things you can refine as a freelancer going on discovery and sales calls is your own sense of intuition. What do you do when you feel like something is off? How do you know when to trust that? Well, you just have to start somewhere. What is the vibe that you get from a client? Now, bear in mind that sometimes the vibe you get is wrong. I've worked with people before who sounded aggressive on the phone, but it was just sort of their regional accent or their approach to doing business. And it didn't mean they were necessarily going to be rude to me. But listen for those clues and dig a little bit deeper. So if you ask that initial question of, have you worked with freelancers before? And they say yes, and it's always been a bad experience, you don't have to write the client off and go, well, obviously the problem is you, the client, because nobody wants to stick around and work with you. Dig a little deeper. Can you tell me a little bit more about why those relationships fell apart? This is valuable for making that distinction between when is a client just unreasonable and ridiculous and when really was it the fault of freelancers, or what is it that this client specifically has an issue with that I need to be mindful of. So let's say I asked that question. They said, yes, we've hired 3 other people and it hasn't worked. So I asked the follow-up question of, tell me a little bit more, like what went wrong there? What were the problems with their work? They might say something like meeting deadlines. Okay, well, that's a major problem in the freelance community that it still blows my mind 10 years in, that it is still this much of an issue for people to meet the deadlines they frequently set for themselves. So that's normal, right? That's a problem with freelancers flaking, and it's not necessarily the client's fault. Mentally, I can file that away of give myself an extra day for their project or make sure that I always turn in their materials on time, because for this client, the deadline is just as, if not more important than the finished product and the overall quality of that product. So you're picking up little gold nuggets throughout all of these conversations that help you decide when a client is just too much and too difficult to work with versus when are you just learning things that are valuable to them, like that information about missing deadlines. So I always dig a little deeper too when we're talking about a very specific project like writing, because you may have to go several layers deep to figure out, okay, is it because this person just has impossible standards to me, or is it an issue of writing style? So I like to ask those questions. Can you send me an example of a written piece that you think really captures the company perspective and does so in a great way that you'd be proud to publish? Or can you send me an example of a writing style on a competitor's blog or website that you find to be a good finished piece? I also like to have those clients review my writing samples thoroughly to make sure that we are a connection on the style side, so that we don't have the relationship going south just because of that particular issue. So, going into your sales calls, think about how you can use this question to learn more about how much education you have to do of your client in terms of telling them what to expect, preparing them for that working relationship. Like, perhaps you want to let them know that you're not going to be willing to sign up for a Slack channel because you're not going to be accessible 24/7 and you don't need one more thing to log into. And that, frankly, none of your other freelance clients ask for that. So you're not willing to make that extra concession for this client working on a small project. You may have to educate them as to why that's a potential issue, right? Why that feels maybe a little bit more like being treated as an employee rather than as an independent contractor. So you're going to ask that to learn. How do they value their freelancers too, right? What do they say about past people they've worked with? Are they talking respectfully about these people? Are they bummed that someone made a decision or closed down their business or went in a different direction with their company and they no longer have the opportunity to work with that freelancer? That's completely different from the client who says, yeah, I've hired and fired 5 different people and all of them just didn't work out, right? Because that's usually code for I'm super difficult and impossible to please. So I just can't figure out why I can't get someone competent to help me with my job, right? So these little nuances in how they answer even yes, no questions and what details they can provide to you about it give you so much helpful information to continue navigating that conversation. And when you sense some of those potential red flags, like, hey, this client might be an over communicator, or this client has never hired a freelancer before, so they might try to treat me like an employee. It empowers you to put down some of those boundaries that can help you navigate that situation effectively, right? Because in a way, you're training this client how to work with you, but you're also kind of doing a service for all of us other freelancers out there. If we ever work with a client like the one that you have, they've been trained a little bit in the ways of things that work, the importance of paying on time, the value of using project management boards, how to conduct productive meetings that don't waste everybody's time. So ultimately, it's kind of like this little bit of good karma that you're putting out there in the world when you help teach a client how to effectively work with you. And as a major bonus, of course, that helps to protect your own boundaries as well. So ask clients so you can better position how you respond during the call and what information you provide to them about working with freelancers. You'll find that this question gives you some really great, candid responses that will allow you to position yourself as the expert or even to exit a relationship that looks like it's going south before it's ever started. Thanks so much for tuning in to another episode. I will see you next week.